When you're training a dog for sport in comparison to actual working or civil type work, how do you take a dog and how do you get them to the point where you're pretty confident that if you send the dog into a real bite, that the dog will actually bite?
I'm pretty confident because I've never had a dog that didn't bite. All the dogs I've trained have bitten. They're just not human aggressive. They're afraid of humans.
Armin is a native of Germany. Starting at a very young age, he has always been dedicated to working with dogs. In the mid-1970s, Armin started handling and training civilian and police dogs. He also owned and operated a K9 security service business in Ontario, Canada, where he trained security dogs for the private sector and instructed on their use and deployment.
And what sort of training steps? Is it like a lot of muzzle work? Is it hidden sleeves? Is it putting them in defense?
Defense is actually kind of bad. Well, it depends. For a police dog, defense is okay. For an integrated tactical dog, it's not okay, right? Because they have to work with other, like FH2, stuff like that. I would pull them out maybe a couple of weeks before the trial, do 2 or 3 tracks, and that was it. He'd go out and do a 98, 99. That's not because I was such a brilliant trainer. That's because he was a phenom. That was in Schutzhund IPO. I grew up in Germany, right? I lived in Germany until I was 18, so I started there.
And what's the difference between IGP out there in Germany in comparison to here in the States?
It's the same, except that I guess certain groups in the States allow the hitting with the stick. And the judges in America have sort of a deduction approach to judging, and in Europe they have, especially in Germany, they have what they call category judging, right? So if they look at an exercise, you can look at it and say, well, overall, it was a good exercise, right? So then the person has to get, or the team has to get 80% or a bit above of the points that are allotted to that exercise. In America, there's a lot of judges that will say, well, he looked at the dog, he gave him a help, that's a point. And then the dog was slow to sit, and that's a point. And he was a little shuffly, and that's a point. So now it's 3 points. Well, back then, it was a 5-point exercise. You take 3 out of 5. It's like the dog didn't even do the exercise. It becomes unsatisfactory, and that's not in the spirit of the sport. It's supposed to be a fun activity, right? Just like in America, they have, like, why do you have an IGP 1 or Schutzhund 1 nationals? There's no point to it for me. IPO 1 is where you start. Schutzhund 3, IPO 3 is where you finish, and that is in Germany, it's called the competition title. There's no competition at Schutzhund 1. Right? That's done here because people are obsessed with competing.
And I'm kind of curious, when it comes to the points, I haven't competed. I've done a lot of different sports, going through school and then training with different clubs. I've competed in jiu-jitsu multiple occasions. And there's certain people, just using this as a comparison, they will plan their strategy based on points. So they're trying to get points, whether or not they get a submission, they just want to get enough points to be able to beat their opponent. And every time I competed, I never had that mentality because for me, that ruined the fun. For me, I really want to get the submission. So I always hunted the submission, and I never worried about, oh no, this happened and I'm going to lose points, because that might set me up for a good opportunity to get a submission. And so do you think that's something that could be similar in the sport world, where they're making certain adjustments in order to get the points, but could often maybe damage the fun that the dog has or even the handler in an attempt to get or maximize their points?
To a point, because you can't do much else with your dog if you do IPO for competition. Like, you can't do suit sports. You can't really mix it up very much. Like, one of my dogs was my patrol dog. I did security patrols, and he got a fair number of real bites, right? Well, he was working helper seminars when he was 22 months old, up to the Schutzhund 3 program. But I didn't have a BH yet because I couldn't get the BH because he was a real ornery dog. And that converging group and stuff like that they do in the BH, well, he would have just whacked people. He was a really socially aggressive dog, not a an edgy dog, but socially aggressive. Come closer, whack. He wouldn't growl, he wouldn't make a sound, he just bit people, which was great at work, but it made Schutzhund much, much more difficult. Um, you know, my first dog was a Great Dane, and he was just a big old Marmaduke kind of a dude, and he didn't take the sport very serious at all. He did his thing, he did his Schutzhund 3 at the time, but he he really kind of uncorked when we did like some of the night exercises, more civil stuff, and he just kind of went off. But you got to say too, at the time, I was a kid. I was way smaller than him. So like I started with him when I was 12. So by the time he was 2 years old, I was 14. So he was walking around with somebody that he really had to protect, right? Like an adult dog doesn't protect an adult human that bosses him around. That makes no sense in nature. It's not ethologically sound. So, it was a different challenge. It was really easy to get to BH with him, but with that Schnauzer, it was not easy because he was just a real mean kind of a dog when it comes to that. Really good with kids, really good with my kids and with everybody else's kids, but just not good with adults. He just wanted to bite everybody.
And I'm kind of curious, when you're training a dog for sport in comparison to actual working or civil type work, how do you take a dog and how do you get them to the point where you're pretty confident that if you send the dog into a real bite, that the dog will actually bite? How do you get to that level where you're pretty confident? And are you able to get 100% confident?
Well, I'm pretty confident because I've never had a dog that didn't bite. The first time out of the gate, not just the dog I had, a dog that I've trained. All the dogs I've trained have bitten on deployment every single time.
And what sort of training steps? Is it like a lot of muzzle work? Is it hidden sleeves? Is it putting them in defense?
No, defense is actually kind of bad because, well, it depends. For a police dog, defense is okay. For an integrated tactical dog, it's not okay, right? Because they have to work with other operators. There's lots of action, there's lots of activity, there's lots of mulling about, and they're not allowed to bite anybody. And they do this in the dark, like complete darkness, right? And then if they find the subject, they have to bite him, right? And defense doesn't work well for that because they don't know what they're encountering in the dark, right? They're running around blind because they don't have nods. So they're running around blind in the dark. They bump into a person. They don't know whether it's a good guy or a bad guy. And if the primary motivation for them to bite somebody is because they're in defense, which means what's the trigger stimulus for defense?
In a sense, they're feeling as though they have to defend themselves. At least that's how I interpret it.
What makes an animal feel that they have to defend themselves?
And that's a good question because I actually wanted to ask what you think or what you think, but the type of training that you've seen when putting a dog in defense. And let me tell you what I've seen just so we can be on the same page and so the audience knows what we're talking about. When I learned defense, it was typically used on dogs that weren't as confident in the bite. And so I've seen trainers, they would put the dog on a back tie and they would come in and pretty much intimidate the dog. If the dog was willing to take, let's say, a sleeve, they would let the dog bite the sleeve, slip the sleeve, and then they would have no protection gear on and they would start, in a sense, attacking the dog, cracking a whip, and make the dog let go of the sleeve and actively try to bite them, even though they didn't have any protection gear on at that point. And having the dog on a back tie kept them relatively safe as long as, the back tie didn't come loose. But that's typically how I've seen defense work done on a dog.
Well, it's always, look, defense is triggered by fear, period. We can call it worry or whatever. The one dog will attack the threat because we've bred certain dogs to do that. It's not a natural behavior. Like a wolf doesn't attack a bear.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. It doesn't. If the bear stands up, the wolf doesn't go like, it's on, buddy, and bites onto him and stays. The defensive bite in nature is most of the time snap and retreat. It's not holding on and it's not deep. It's not good quality biting anyways. We have bred some dogs that are defensively aggressive, which means they will bite. And again, the definition of bite in the pet world and bite in my world, and aggression in my world and aggression in the pet world are miles and miles and miles apart, right? So defense is always worry based. So an animal doesn't defend itself unless it is afraid that something bad will happen to it. Makes no sense otherwise, right?
Mhm.
And it's the same thing when a dog deals with a human. So if you make him afraid, and a lot of times if a dog's on a back tie or on a table or anything like that, they have really no other option. So they start biting. That doesn't mean that flight turned into fight. It's just all of a sudden they can't flee, so they flee forward.
Mhm.
And most of the time, like that, the concept of fight or flight is actually a very incorrect concept, because if you watch in nature what happens, let's take a mouse. Right? Mouse is not a very combative individual, but you catch one in your house, you catch it in the corner, and you push with your hands into the corner. Sooner or later, the mouse is going to bite in your hand, right? But if you open just a little bit of space up, that mouse is just going to bolt out of there. And as soon as it bites you,
Mhm.
if you pull your hand, it's going to run too. So did the flight that ended in the corner turn into fight when it bit you? Or was it just flight forward and I'm trying to get out of here by any means necessary?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and
Yeah.
that's a
So
really smart way to interpret it for sure.
yeah, so it's a I think there's flight and there's flight forward, and then there's fight. And there are some, like you look at a wolverine, right? They have Wolverine or honey badger is a great example because you see videos of them on the internet all the time. They have almost zero tendency to flee. They're not necessarily fighting the lion, but they're definitely standing their ground with the lion and dealing with the threat a little bit different. They have almost zero tendency to fight or flight. So there's never where the honey badger said, "Ooh, I'm out of here," and then he says, "I'm turning around and now I'm attacking the lion." Right? This whole switching from flight to fight doesn't really ever happen in real life. It can happen the other way, where the individual starts fighting and then says this is not a good idea, and then they take off. But it's people have this illusion that if they put a dog into a no way out situation, like a sided table, some of them even have a backboard or back wall where the dog can't go anywhere, that they can get a dog that actually wants to retreat from the threat. They can't, so they panic and they bite. And I've seen lots of dogs like that. In the end, when the option to leave is there, they do leave.
What about the idea behind a dog that may not think they're capable? And then once they start giving the dog bites, once they got the dog actually biting, the dog realizes, okay, I actually have more power and capability than I thought. And maybe the dog even gets some kind of internal charge from it. So we're, in a sense, changing the way the dog perceives it. Is that something that can commonly happen, or is that
No,
just a
I don't. I
misinterpretation?
don't. I don't think it happens at all. I think after a while, like almost everywhere, bite work starts with prey work, right?
Mhm, absolutely.
Equipment. And when I say prey, I always say equipment because the dog doesn't view a human as prey. They just don't. Um, because with all the stuff that we have done and all the conditioning you try to do, and then a person runs and the dog is sent and then the dog still doesn't bite. Well, how does that happen, right? You have a running prey object, but you don't because it's a human. And dogs aren't cannibalistic. They don't kill the humans to eat their own kind, so to speak. They just don't do that. But in sport, we condition the dog that the rag, the tug, the wedge, the short sleeve, the big sleeve, the suit, whatever you want to say, is prey, right?
Mhm.
So after the dog accepts this inanimate object as a prey substitute, its drive can be activated that way, and the dog shows prey drive. Um, and then the equipment becomes prey. So every time the dog bites the equipment, he's in a relatively positive state of mind. And every time we shed equipment to the dog is also in a very positive state of mind, right? So you could teach a dog, um, that most dogs have at least some interest in prey in a sleeve or a jambier or I should call it the Winkler cuff since it's called a Belgian sleeve, but it's really If you can find pictures before 96 where anybody used those, let me know. Because I was using sleeves from old bite suits to help dogs target to the shoulder and bicep. And, now you see them everywhere, and nobody knows where it came from. They say Belgian. It's not a Belgian sleeve at all. But whatever. The thing is, all these things are pieces of equipment where the dog bites for the pleasure of it, for the fun of it, for the satisfaction of satisfying prey drive. I had a little York Terrier for many years, and I could not get him to accept inanimate objects as prey substitutes. Couldn't do it. Like he would fetch a dead squirrel all day, but he would never take a tug or a ball or anything like that. He would see the tug flying through the air and he would run after it all excited. And then he'd get there and he'd stop and then he'd kind of walk away really disappointed. Like he was just not into it at all. And I'm a pretty good helper. I could not get that dog to take anything other than real game. And that's, again, we have bred the service dog breeds, the working dog breeds, to accept inanimate object. So when somebody says my dog has a lot of ball drive, the dog has the trait that he accepts artificial items easily as prey, and he has good prey drive.
Mm-hmm.
There's no ball drive, right? There's
Right,
a very
yeah.
few. There's 4 drives. That's it.
Yeah, but it's like when people say toy drive, we know they're talking about prey drive in a sense. And also I've never done any
we
actual.
hope. We hope.
Right. Yeah. I've never done any civil training myself. I've only done sport dogs because I prefer to build the dog up through that prey drive and running and doing the escape or flee bites. I've always found that a lot of fun, and I enjoy being able to work with a dog, whether it be on the suit or a bite sleeve, and then afterwards sit down and pet the dog and play with the dog. And
Yeah.
I've always really enjoyed that. So I just wanted to point that out because I haven't done civil work. So
So-
I don't want to talk as if I have, even though I have worked with a couple police dogs. I didn't do the training for the police dogs. I just got in the suit.
Yeah. And again, I like to stay the adversary. The dogs don't have to hate me, but I don't want to create a social conflict. Like if you do bite work and then you sit down and pet them, you create some kind of you take away the part of the intensity. Like we see that with sometimes the guys just don't follow protocol enough and interact with dogs on the team in a social friendly manner and call their name and bring them over and all that kind of stuff. And again, our dogs can be handled by pretty much every other handler on the team. But if you get really social and friendly, where you develop a social relationship and bond, not just the sort of discrimination stuff we do, but actually become friends with a dog, the dogs don't muzzle fight them as well. There's an inhibition, there's a block. So if you want to be a muzzle decoy for the dogs, then you shouldn't really be friends with them. And for me, even though I do for the dogs I buy and place, I handle the dogs. I do a lot of the stuff, but once they go to the new handler, now the real work begins, and now it has to be intense and very strong and tough. And I can't, like, I see sometimes the dogs will come with their detection toy. They find a bomb, the dog gets rewarded, they run around all proud of themselves, and they want to get some gratification from team members. Well, go to your dad. I don't want to play with you. I don't want to pet you. I don't want to touch you because I'm a neutral guy that you don't bite when I have uniform on. But when I'm in street clothes, I'm fair game. And that's the case. Like if we're training together and the dogs are fine with me all day, and then, I take the uniform off to drive home and stuff like that. One of the dogs sees me, they just want to come and have at it. There's just no inhibition at all. And I think people put too much emphasis on civil, right? There is no such thing as civil aggression. A dog's either aggressive or he's not aggressive. And if he's aggressive, he wants to do harm. That's it. It's like a lot of the pets that I'm constantly seeing videos that the dog is human aggressive. Well, they're not really human aggressive. They're defensive and they don't want to be near strangers because they're worried that something bad happens to them. So they bark and they growl and they hackle and sometimes they take shots. because they want to drive the threat away. They don't really want to annihilate the threat, right? When we work, my distinction line of aggression is when the dog wants to really wreck this dude, then he's aggressive. And before then, that's all just a bunch of postures and gestures to try to stay safe. That's not, it's not reliable. That would never work in a police dog situation. So, like if people come to a pet trainer with human aggression, I watched the videotapes. I said, like, not a chance. They're just not human aggressive. They're afraid of humans. It's, you know, that they just don't want the human that close. And, you know, that still needs to be addressed. There's no question about that. But the term aggression is just used a little loosely. To me, I don't know if you've ever seen it or read it. I have an article and also a PowerPoint that's called the Winkler aggression model. And I list all the things that motivates dogs to do things that we can see and maybe tap into and so on. And the line of distinction for me is when a dog is in a state of elevated emotion and arousal, he wants to do harm to somebody or perpetrate violence under somebody, right? And if that's not the case, then it's not really aggression. Then it's a defensive response, but most of the time it's a weak defensive response. If you took those dogs farther away, that response is completely gone, right? Like most dogs see a human at 50, 60 meters, they don't care, right? Now you bring them within 10 meters, you're going to see a response because now it's the danger zone, so to speak. And they just want to be safe. And there are some dogs, I don't see very many pets. Obviously, my wife met one not too long ago. And I don't know what tripped him off either. It was kind of a dog that had sort of nipped at people before and bitten at some people. And they brought him for a board and train. And, you know, he was real accepting of my wife. Everything was fine. Before she put him away, she wanted to sort of bond up with him without the owners around. She sat around with him, took him for a walk. Everything was fine. She sat down on the front stairs and he started kind of climbing on her really weird. And then all of a sudden he flipped out. And
Would you say that was a neurological issue with the dog?
I mean, partly, but partly also defensive. And what exactly triggered it, you don't really know. It could be that when he climbed up on her, he really first time came to the realization that she's a stranger. You know what I mean? And then that's what triggered the, what do I do now? What do I do now? And he started biting, and it with every bite it escalated. Like there was minimum 17 different locations that he bit her, including the head and skull. I can show you pictures. It was a horrific attack. And at that point, once it started, it could have even been partly, you know, a vibe my wife gave off because a year before that she got bitten by a dog that redirected from another dog. It was a really sweet dog. My analysis of it was PTSD because he was a real sweet dog. We actually imported the dog years ago and trained him to be a police dog. He was always a very social, sweet, nice dog. And he was not dog aggressive when we had him at all. Like he came with his half brother and a couple of other dogs. He never looked at a dog cross-eyed, nothing. And he never showed anything. But the handler that got him had another dog, a previous dog that was retiring, and he was dog aggressive. So in the first couple of weeks of school already, that dog attacked him. And I figured that would be the end of it. And we didn't see the guy very much after the school was over. And he, after this happened, the backstory was the dog had been attacked by this other dog over and over and over again until this big dog really started fighting back, right? And then in the end, the last fight they had, the big dog ended up killing the other dog or maiming him so bad that he had to be put down. But it was a real serious, nasty fight. So the dog had been with us for a few days. And he had been fine with my wife and the same love bug that he had always been when we knew him. And one day, like a friend of ours wanted to leave a dog for a few days for boarding, just boarding. and we have an outbuilding with some crates in it where we can keep the dog. So the other dog was already in the crate. She was out with this dog, and he was all excited about going back to the shed, because when they come back, it's evening, it's feeding time, so he was all excited. And the door wasn't properly latched, so he just banged the door, it flew open, he went in there all hunky-dory, and all of a sudden he saw that dog in there. And he just lost it. And he tried to go at the dog, but he was in such a panic frenzy. He tried to go at the dog, and my wife just called his name a few times just to get his attention away from the dog. And he looked around, he couldn't get at the dog. He looked, he saw her, and then his eyes were just glazed over, and he just attacked her.
And before I forget, can you send me the link to the article that you mentioned earlier that you wrote on aggression? I'd like to check it out, but I'd also like to put it in the description of this video, so anyone else who's interested, they can check it out as well.
They're all on my website.
Okay, cool. And with this kind of like spontaneous, in a sense, aggression where the dog just randomly acts out, I've seen that a couple times in my career. And each time there was nothing that predicted the behavior. The dog just snapped and went into it. And that's why I was asking if you think it was a neurological issue, because with the two dogs that I saw it, literally there was no signs. I feel like I'm pretty decent at reading a dog's body language, seeing a sudden change of behavior that could signal the possibility of aggression. And these two dogs smiling, happy, and then suddenly aggressively attacking the trainer.
But I think that the condition PTSD is really not identified enough in dogs. Like the big police dog that attacked my wife, that was PTSD. I'm 100% sure of that. And it wasn't, I mean, for us, it could look spontaneous, but then if you look at his history, and I think there was a lot of Vietnam vets that were incorrectly diagnosed with schizophrenia, when really it was PTSD. They saw something that reminded them of something really horrific in their time of deployment, and they started acting out like they were crazy.
They called it, I think, shell shock at the time. Are you familiar with the book, The Body Keeps the Score?
No.
It's a really interesting book. One of my friends recommended it to me. And they did studies where people that were in very traumatizing experiences, one of the ones that they use as an example in the book is a car crash. And there was two people in the car crash. They were both almost burned alive. It was very traumatizing for both of them. They put them into MRI scanners and they had them revisualize or relive, in a sense, the experience that they had. And it was often really difficult because the part of the brain that would register time was completely inactive when they were thinking about it, but everything else was reactive in the brain. So the person was basically, in a sense, reliving the actual experience, the amount of stress, the anxiety, everything came flooding back to them. And what was interesting about this case is the two people interpreted it completely differently. The guy, when he was going through, he started to panic, his adrenaline went up, his heartbeat increased significantly. And the woman, she basically, in a sense, shut down. And I don't remember all the exact terminology. I'm most certainly not an expert on this, but she didn't have any sort of response. Like, she completely shut out the entire experience. But the reason why I bring that up is it makes me wonder when you're talking about PTSD, because I'm diagnosed with PTSD. I served in the Marine Corps. I was a machine gunner. I was there for the invasion in Iraq. And there's certain things that will instantly trigger certain memories. But mine's not considered that extreme because I feel like I'm able to rationalize it. And I'll give you a quick example. When I'm driving on the road, if I see a dead deer on the side of the road, or a dead raccoon, a large enough animal where a bomb could be placed, or a piece of trash or a box, my brain instantly goes to IED, improvised explosive device. But then the logical side of my brain goes, probably not. And then even if it is, I highly doubt they're going to be targeting the dog trainer. So I experience it. There's a small spike of stress, but then it quickly goes back down because I'm able to rationalize what's actually happening. But it makes me wonder if a dog, if something happens where it triggers that past memory and then their brain activates in the way in which it was during that time, that could have been traumatizing for them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Like you say, you know, the deer carcass on the side of the road, you probably felt a little bit of that anxiety or panic inside several times before the logical brain actually came to the conclusion that it was because of what you had experienced when you were overseas. The first time you probably had no idea why it happened. Oh, it's a dead deer, and all of a sudden I feel worried.
Mhm.
And I think it's like that with a lot of veterans. They like say the people with a car crash, if they had the radio playing and there was a song on when that crash happened, um, it may reproduce the same
Mm.
responses as the crash. There is no crash, right? But the song, which is obviously not part of what caused the crash, but it's a neutral stimulus. It's basically, I use PTSD a lot of times to explain classical conditioning. You don't know why it's happening until somebody explains it to you. And you
Mhm.
can't explain it at all to a dog. He doesn't know why he feels that way. He just feels that way. Right. So for that dog that attacked my wife, basically coming face to face with another dog was fight for my life or die. And that was the response. And then he couldn't attack the dog, so he took it out on the next thing that was obviously in his vision. And that could trigger. It could have triggered the other dog too. Like, how many times did the dog get corrected, jerked with a leash, smacked, yelled at, or whatever when he tried to climb on people? So as long as they were walking, standing, all that was fine. Even when they were sitting together for a while, it was fine. But once he started climbing, he got tense, and then all of a sudden he just erupted.
And I'm
Right?
sure the dog's sense of smell probably plays a
Mhm.
big part as well,
Yeah.
since they perceive the world with smell significantly more than we do. I mean, there's some studies that say that certain dogs have a sense of smell a million times stronger than ours.
Mhm. Yeah.
And even with us, I mean, when I went back to MCRD, Marine Corps Recruit Training
Mhm.
Depot, because I was a drill instructor after I was infantry, once I got back and I was in the squad bays, and the smell of the squad bays, it's a very distinct smell because they use this cheap cologne called Bulldog and they kind of spray it
Mhm.
everywhere and mop with it. So once you walk in, you have that smell and it instantly triggers
Mhm.
all those past memories. And then it makes me wonder, and this is something I think is very important to consider with professional trainers that are working with aggressive dogs. We always like to say, oh, you need to be confident, you need to be confident. Well, I believe that confidence is a byproduct of knowing what to do.
Mhm.
And so if we're working with a dog, especially if we think the dog might bite, then it instantly is going to change the way that we feel, which is going to create a sense of smell that the dog can smell, and that's going to change the dog's behavior as well.
And if it's defensive, it's worry based. So if dad's worried, he's already worried. Dad's worried. It
Mhm.
just makes it even bigger.
And then how can we as professional trainers when we're working with aggressive dogs, and I'm glad this came up in the conversation because I'm doing um, a live we're calling it a case study breakdown. One of my
Mhm.
friends, he posted a video. It's like a 45-minute video of him working with a German Shepherd that had issues with aggression. And we're going to go through the video and kind of break down what we're seeing. I don't consider myself an aggression expert. I've worked with a couple dozen dogs in my career
Mhm.
that had aggression issues, but almost all of them I was able to fix simply by putting them through a training routine, giving them exercise, giving them some sort of stability, giving them a good diet, and then just doing good training so they understand communication. And a lot of times they're like, oh my gosh, someone actually understands me.
Mhm.
Because a lot of them seem to be a byproduct of frustration or confusion, or maybe the dog was acting out certain things that was in a sense providing what the dog needed, right? They bluff, they act aggressive, and they get a result from it, and then it amplifies or it increases. And one of the things that is really important to me when I'm considering working with a dog that's aggressive is I always think about safety. And if I feel as if the dog might bite me, then I will wear a bite suit. But I've only had to do that a couple times, and none of the dogs actually ever bit the bite suit, minus one occasion.
A lot of times it's just a nip, or they bite like the cuff of the suit and they tug a little
Mhm.
bit. There's nothing really with any oomph behind it.
Yeah, and anytime I've handled aggressive dogs, I always took them away from the owner. So,
Mhm.
like, if someone were to schedule, let's say, a private lesson, and they had a dog that had some sort of issue related to aggression, number one, I wouldn't meet them at their house because that greatly increased the odds of me getting bit.
Mhm.
And then when I would meet them in a public environment, like a park or something like that, I wouldn't handle the dog. And there's trainers out there that are like, just give me the dog. But to me, it's not worth the risk. I don't want to get bitten. I don't want to put the dog in a situation where they feel like they have to get bit.
Yeah.
What sort of safety protocols would you recommend for a trainer that is starting to take on aggression cases, especially the new trainers that are trying to prove themselves?
Well, since the last thing you said was new trainers, the first response for me is don't.
Mm.
Learn first and go out with people that have dealt with that for a long time and learn from them until you have a certain understanding of it. Like, um, aggression is misunderstood.
Hmm.
And in the pet industry, it's basically something that is undesirable. So we just try to make it go away. They don't really ever look or educate themselves with real aggression. Like when it really goes to where the dog can go to. So when a dog really wrecks somebody uh, and keeps on doing it until he's stopped by somebody else, it is really completely different than what you see in the pet industry. So like I live 99% of the time on the other side of that line, which is where we create aggression. We try to
Hmm.
get the dog to be aggressive on command, and in the higher units that I work with, selectively aggressive. So it isn't just bite everybody. No, 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 no. Bite only people that are exactly like this, not any of us. And that's not as easily done as people think it is. But if you don't educate yourself on how to create aggression, control aggression without it being gone, because when you give the command, it's there again. Um, it is it's a different side of it that most pet trainers that advertise that they deal with aggression problems don't ever really look at. Like there's this one ponytail doofus on the internet that uses the e-collar a lot. So this is little Vizsla, like 6, 7 months old Vizsla puppy in a cage, a wire cage, and she growls because she's not home. This is a stranger. He looks weird to begin with. I'd growl at him, right? So he just starts nuking her until the dog physically turns around in the crate and sticks her head in the corner and just cowers there. Like people like that shouldn't train dogs. They shouldn't own
Yeah,
dogs.
that's bad training.
That,
Yeah.
but the thing is, because the fact that the dog growled was so bad. Like I don't know how many dogs I've gotten off the plane that growled at me through the crate because they didn't know where they were. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
They just went through the biggest ordeal of their life. They were in a plane. There was a whole bunch of people that just jostled the crates around, shoved them onto pallets, moved them around with forklifts, right? And then some other stranger comes and like, what's going to happen to me now? And if the dogs are a little older, a lot of times they sit there and they growl, and some of them get pretty ornery about it. And there's you have to read that a little bit. Like there's only one dog that really bit me when I let him out. Just one. And I could tell right away. I brought this dog home. He growled at me at the airport. I couldn't take him out there, which I normally do. I drove him home. Um, my wife helped me carry him into a little room. Nobody else in there except for him. And we let him decompress for a little bit. Went back to him, tried to offer him food. He'd take the food and then he growled. Like he just
Hmm.
would not stop. And anytime I reached for the latch, he just lost his mind. And I said, like, this dog will bite me. Right. So I tried everything. I sat in front of him. I talked to him. I did food. I did all kinds of stuff to try to sort of become his buddy. But he acted the same way every time I went to the crate door. And then enough hours had gone by, he couldn't hold his urine anymore, so he ended up peeing the crate. I said, like, all right, man up, Winkler. Like, I'm not gonna let a dog sit in his own pee, right? So I I put on leather undersleeve, right? Had regular clothes on, and I made a sort of a lasso out of a. They didn't have so many slip leads yet back in those days, but just made sort of the end of the leash into a lasso. Opened the crate, stood beside it, hung it over, and as soon as the door opened, I put it in front. So he basically walked into that sling,
Hmm.
and he went forward. He pushed. The leash tension may have contributed to it a little bit, but he made the leash a little tight. He looked around, he saw me, and whack! He just latched onto me, full, deep, hard, squeezed the shit out of it. And I said, "All right, what do we do now?" So he held on. So I had one outside kennel. It was like a 10 by 20 with a roof over it. So I said, all right, let's see if I can walk you out there. So he squeezed me for probably, that's maybe 40 yards, maybe 50. But so we walked, he squeezed the crap out of me for a good half of that distance. And then he started just holding me. He wasn't really trying to crush me anymore. He was just holding it. And then I got him to the kennel door, and I opened the door, and I put my hand in the water bucket, splashed some water around, so you see there was water there. So he would roll his eyes back and forth, look at me, looked at the kennel, looked at me, looked at the kennel, and all of a sudden he spit me out and went in the kennel. And then I closed the door, and then it was the same again. I couldn't get to the door. I couldn't try to get him out, nothing like that. I sat with a little plastic spoon and fed him food through the thing. I held a big rawhide. I stuck through the kennel. I sat there, let him chew it while we were there. And while he was busy chewing, he was fine. But anytime I walked to the door and reached for the latch, the same thing would happen again. So I said, this is bad. I thought about having a friend of mine come over, put a bite suit on, put him on a bite so I could leash him up. I said, nah, that's no good. So I ordered a catch pole. It was the first time in my life that I ever ordered a catch pole. So I ordered a catch pole, and as soon as it arrived, I went outside, put it over.
And what is that? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you said. You ordered a what?
A catch pole.
Oh, okay.
Snare pole, whatever.
Gotcha,
right?
gotcha.
I don't know. I don't know what people say. I mean,
it's the thing that the
animal
if someone's
control.
going out, animal control. Exactly right. Yeah.
It's basically a long metal tube with a sling at the end that you can make big and then tighten and then lock it tight. And then the dog can't get you because you can physically hold him away from you.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
So I went to get him. I got him snared up, and then we went for a walk, a couple of miles. And every time I tried to pet him, he would turn around and try to sort of push in my direction, and I just, at safety first, keep him at a distance, just rubbed his butt, and within a couple of days, he had figured out the snare pole, and he wouldn't let me snare him anymore because he had enough room to avoid it, right? So then, again, man up time. So I took a big, giant tug, and I sort of walked along the kennel until he stopped looking at me, and he started looking at the tug. It was like along the kennel. And then when he was nice and quiet and nice and fixated on that tug, I opened the door. He whacked the tug. I grabbed his collar, hooked him up, and then we went for another 2-mile walk. And he never dropped that tug the whole time. So that satisfied him enough. And then, by that time, familiarity sets in, and then the stranger danger starts going away, which means the source of defense goes away. And then we became real good buds, and he was a really good dog. He was a scary dog. People didn't really like working him very much, but great.
And was it genetics, or was it a learned behavior, or was it because of past experiences, combination?
I mean, very strong genetics to bite, because I know relatives, and the person that had him is known as a brute. Anybody I talk to about this particular individual says he's mean and cruel to the dogs. So
that'll usually do it.
Yeah, I found that out too the first time I tried to out him off a ball. We were going for a walk. At that point, he was pretty good. I had done all kinds of things with him to get him used to things. E-collar conditioning took a while too, because you can't just put stuff around a dog's neck that wants to eat you. So that took a while. I gave him a ball. He loved that right away. And we were tugging. Everything was fine. As soon as I gave the out command, both front legs wrapped around my left thigh, and I saw nothing but teeth and foam. He was pushing his head against my leg, just snarling. I said, well, keep it. I have others. I'm not going to fight with you. My first advice to every handler that I give a leash to is always, don't fight with a dog that likes fighting. Because even if you win, you're going to go to the hospital. It's not a smart thing. So,
yeah, and even if you don't get injured, if it's internally or intrinsically rewarding for the dog, they're still getting a charge out of that, and you could unintentionally put them on a variable reinforcement schedule on the exact behavior you're trying to prevent. Yeah,
possibly. Like the thing is, it's don't back down like a wimp, but also don't go toe to toe with the dog. Just let it neutralize itself, and then find another technique. And with him, I found out it was obviously very handler related, because the handler was very harsh with him. that I had no problem doing two toy with him. And I had no problem if I downed him like 5 meters away from me and set out, then he was fine. But next to me, it was really, really hard. Took me along. It was one of the most difficult things with him to train. But he turned out to be a great dog. Now, I ended up keeping him because I didn't know who to sell him to, because if anybody tried to bully that dog, he would have bitten the crap out of them. And then after 2 or 3 different handlers, he was going to be put to sleep. That happens usually, right? So.
Yeah. I had a case that was very similar to the one that you were describing, where you're sitting next to the kennel, you're trying to build a relationship. I just had the dog for an evaluation because the owners were considering either trying to rehome the dog or even take the dog to like a rescue or a shelter. And after I evaluated the dog, I told him, I was like, here, if you, more likely than not, a rescue is not going to take this dog because it's a very difficult case. It's a big dog. And in addition to that, if you take it to a shelter, it's almost guaranteed you're going to have the dog's going to get euthanized.
Yes.
So if you want this dog to live, you're pretty much committed to this dog, and the breeder wouldn't take the dog back. So I said, you need to keep this dog unless you're willing to accept that the dog's going to be put down. So my recommendation is, you took the dog in as a puppy. I think you should keep the dog and just continue to work with the dog and do the best that you can. And I only had the dog for 1 day, and it was the same thing where I knew the dog had to go to the bathroom. And at this point, I no longer had my bite suit. I had just sold it because I wasn't doing decoy work actively as much anymore. And when I let the dog out, I didn't even loop it with a leash. I just kind of hoped the dog wouldn't attack me. And I was looking at the dog through my phone, and this probably wasn't the smartest thing to do, to just let the dog out, because it was a larger dog. And I was watching it through my phone because I didn't want to make direct eye contact with the dog. And the dog came up to me, and I was wearing shorts, and it just stared at my calf for about 20 minutes. And then finally it walked away, and I was like, thank goodness, like, why did I put myself into this position? And the dog, the way that I kind of interpreted the dog's behavior was that the dog was what I would often call a forward fear aggression dog. I don't know if that's a technical term, but meaning the dog was afraid, but instead of trying to avoid what the dog perceived as a threat, the dog would try to neutralize the threat.
Yeah.
And it seemed fearful because it was in the yard and it bumped into the trash can, and the trash can made a slight noise. So it was noise sensitive. And you can see that that startled the dog. And then I turned to walk away to go back inside the house. And it was a room that was attached to the backyard. It was the master bedroom. And then I had it closed off to the rest of the house. So as I walked in, I was basically in a cornered position, and the dog followed me and bit my back. And once the dog bit my back, I knew, okay, I can't run because that's just going to amplify it. I pretty much realized, okay, it's a fight. So I turned around and I grabbed the dog's collar. And when I went to grab the dog's collar, it bit my hand, and then I held its collar. I didn't fight the dog, but basically I was preventing the dog from biting me. And then he looked at me, or she did. She looked at me, I looked at her, and then I let go and she walked away. And it was fine. And I lucked out, which does bring me to another question is, do you think it's fair to say that dogs will size up handlers, trainers, by their actual size, in a sense where like let's say someone's 280 pounds, they're 6'5", really big dude, in comparison to someone who's 5'6". Do you think the person who's 5'6", 135 pounds is more likely to get attacked by a dog than someone who's significantly larger? And if so, should they take extra safety protocols?
I would actually say the other way around, because again, you use the term fear and aggression. And I think it's a bad term. Call it what it is. It's defense. The dog is worried and wants to neutralize the threat. Right? To me, it, like, she bit you in the back, but you were able to turn around, which makes me think that she let go.
She didn't hold. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, she let go right away.
Same with your hand. She whacked your hand and basically, don't do that, don't do that. It's a defensive mechanism. And I think a lot of times people are maybe a little bit more understanding, owners especially, if you identify it for what it is. It's defense, right? And there's 3 responses. If you read the Winkler aggression model, you will see that. There's active defense, which means offense is the best defense. The dogs will attack, and those dogs are aggressive in defense, right?
And you said that you call that active defense?
Yes. The active defensive reaction.
That was.
The active defensive reaction. No, it's not, because she let go.
Okay.
Because it's not aggression. For me, it's not aggression until the dog lets go and tries to do you harm. She didn't want to do you harm. She didn't want to be harmed by you.
Well, why did she attack me when I was walking away?
Because it was a weird look. Whatever
Mm.
the look was. She could have bitten you when she came out of the kennel, but she didn't. But in the house, in tight spaces, all of a sudden the thresholds change, right? Lots of
Yeah, she was
space.
outside though. I mean, I walked in, I left her outside,
And then she
and she
came
followed
in
me.
and she
Yeah.
followed you, and then all of a sudden she came to a situation that worried her. That's to me
Mm.
always what it is. If the dog just wants to hurt people, they're just going to go hurt people. They're not going to let
Yeah.
go, right?
Yeah, and this dog didn't even bite that hard. I mean, I had
Yeah.
a bruise. I didn't even have a puncture.
So for me, that type of biting is snapping is a part of the gesture response, right? So we have the active defensive reaction. We have the strong passive defensive reaction that most sport dogs have. Basically, they're happy with a stand up, but they're pretty confident. They're not going to bite unless they have to, right? But they're also confident and strong enough that they stand their ground and they're not going to let you back them up. Then they would probably escalate and resort to biting. And then you have the weak passive defensive reaction. And they show almost everything that the strong passive defensive reaction has, except that they retreat. They will bark, they will snarl, they will show teeth, but they will retreat. They may even snap, but then retreat after the snap. But the retreating is a big part of what makes them who they are. And obviously, when I give my lecture, it's usually to an audience that wants to have dogs that do bite. So those dogs are usually useless for us. We can work with active defensive reaction. We can work with a strong passive. We just have to realize that if the only source of aggression is defense for the strong passive, when he runs into a very unfamiliar situation that doesn't pose a threat to him, he's probably not going to bite right away. Why should he? He's confident, right? He may bark, and we're in the Mexican standoff, but he's not going to attack. Where the active defensive dogs is like, if you're in my space, whack, and then they stay on and they try to annihilate what's there, which is an unnatural reaction. It's something we bred into the working dogs. It doesn't really happen in very many other breeds. Pit bulls, because of some of their other problems, but most dogs don't do the bite and hold on stuff, which is why most of the dogs are not suitable for police work, right? Like everybody talks about the Corsos and the Presas and I have never, and I've met some good Corsos and I've met some good Presas. I have never met any dogs in those breeds, whether it's Tosa Inu or Corso or Bull Mastiffs. One Bull Mastiff I had that was actually capable of doing that and willingly doing that. But everything else, as soon as the fight gets a little bit real, they're gone, right? So I wanted to wrap up the aggression piece that you asked about earlier, the civil stuff. I think a lot of people waste a lot of time doing stuff that is role player work, but has nothing to do with aggression. I've worked plenty of dogs that loved muzzle fighting. They thought it was the greatest game on earth, right? Because most of the time the guys are on the ground, the dog's not really worried, so they're just enjoying themselves. It's like a wrestling match. Same dogs still have gone out on the street and failed. Hidden sleeve is very, very projected. The dog knows that something's there. 90% of the hidden sleeves that are being used nowadays are not hidden at all, right? Because they're made out of the same material as a bite suit. Just pulling a sleeve over it isn't gonna hide it. Like these are dogs that can find a gram of heroin, a gram, right? But they can't smell a sleeve this big underneath your sweatshirt. That's ridiculous. At the latest, when they bite into it and say, "I know this," and then they're fine again, right? So the Dog Armor Pro is pretty good, but a real serious dog, you need a lot of protection, a lot of extra protection. Like I did it with a couple of our dogs, and there's one dog in the bunch who was just a crusher. And I had two neoprenes on and a leather gauntlet on, and then the Dog Armor Pro over top, and then street clothes over top. There are dimples that are still in that leather gauntlet today from that dog. So if you wear that without anything else underneath, like a lot of people do, and I don't know what kind of biters they have, but not the kind I worked. So for me, a lot of that is very telegraphed, and the dogs. Like I have a hidden sleeve made out of leather. I have one made out of nylon. I have several made out of Kevlar. I have a complete hidden suit out of Kevlar, right? But if the dogs bite that same Kevlar hidden sleeve a few times, as soon as they bite it, they recognize it. They've bitten it before. It's nothing new to them again. And the same thing goes with most of the things that they bite. The same with the dog armor. Like if you work the dog armor every day, the dog knows that he's allowed to bite that, and it becomes a game again. I use one of my old KMPV suit inners. You know what the KMPV suit is like? The two suits, right?
Not unless it's. I pretty much have only used the suits that are commonly used in
French rings,
French ring, Mondio ring, and then the IGP sleeves.
Yeah. So the KMPV suit is made up of two suits. It's got a leather suit underneath, and it has a jute suit on the outside. The jute suit is maybe a little thinner than a sleeve cover, but not much, right? So the whole thing weighs 45 pounds. It's ridiculous to ride a bicycle with and take a bite while you're riding a bicycle. But you got to do it. It's part of the sport. But I don't have that old one I have. I don't have that inside of jute anymore. It just sits around, not touching any kind of other equipment. And we use that as a hidden suit every once in a while. It's not quite as good protection as the Kevlar one is because you're, there's certain parts of that suit that aren't well padded. There's leather, so you're probably not going to get punctured, but it hurts like a bitch when you get bit. Just a sheet of leather. And,
like when you're wearing a comp suit?
Yeah, or leather scratch pants, right? Something
like you're wearing a jean jacket almost. Yeah, I'm curious, when it comes to targeting, do you ever use those tables that you were talking about earlier that has the sides? Because I know a lot of trainers use those specifically just for targeting.
You can't teach targeting on a table.
Why not?
Because you have to shove it in his mouth.
Mm-hmm.
How is it?
Yeah, what I've seen and what I've done in the past is like we start to present wherever we want the dog to bite. And once the dog is actively biting at it, so we'll kind of go in slowly, dog bites at it, we pull back. It's like, okay, I see the dog is going to bite in that area, and then we feed it to them essentially.
But the thing is, would that same dog still bite you there if he was running 50 yards first?
I think if you do enough repetitions, right?
But you can do it other ways too. Like I said, targeting should be the dog's decision. Right. And look, targeting has relevance in sport. We target the dogs in the real world because where we deliberately put the dogs gives us an opportunity to sort of mess with their mind, to create aggression. Like I would say I do over 90% of all aggression work in the suit, right? Because there comes a time when the dog bites the suit because he likes biting the suit. And then all of a sudden you kind of get that vibe where you go, I'm glad I have a suit on. Right? And once he's aggressive, he doesn't really bite the suit anymore. He's trying to bite the person inside. And that's the emotional state that I'm talking about. Then the only thing I have to teach him is that in the real world, the guy doesn't look like a Michelin man. He looks like you and me, right? Street clothes. So we have to do, that's what the muzzle is good for. The same thing goes for scent. When a dog is searching a house or searching the woods, he obviously needs to look for a human, not for a bite suit scent, right? So that's the only time we give the dog the civil picture, or at least I do. I don't know what a lot of other people do, but the thing is, even the muzzle decoys a lot of times react too much like decoys. They don't react like a human would. Yeah. They fall down too early. It's just a whole different ballgame. Now, if a dog targets a guy in a muzzle, that's great because we have the targeting. But if the aggression has never been developed anywhere else, then, the same thing goes with that equipment shedding. It's the most useless thing ever. Is it like, who has a bite suit, right? Or who has the sleeve? I do. And I tell everybody that. I said, if I ever lose my mind and switch to the other side and you show up at my house, don't send a dog. I can take a puppy sleeve and a Swiss Army knife, and that's the end of your dog. The last thing I would ever do is shed the only protection that I have against the dog's bite. It's completely ridiculous. The dog will never have to choose between a guy in a suit and a guy naked in the shower. Like, that's not a choice the dog ever has to make. So why are we torturing the dog? And the dumb thing is, they tease the shit out of the dog. to make them leave the jacket on the ground until the dog physically moves past beside the jacket and goes at the guy, goes at the guy, goes at the guy. Then he puts the jacket back on and gives him a bite. What was the point of all that?
For
Right?
sport training, would you say there's value in slipping the sleeve or slipping the suit to give the dog a win, to do that victory
Oh
lap
yeah,
that's
yeah.
very common?
I slip the sleeve even with my combat dogs. I just don't care if they spit the suit out and come at me
Mm.
without a suit on. There's some that do. That's just who they are. But I don't care if they do. Like if they like what I do most of the time when I do the bite drills, the dog bites, the dog does his thing, I do my thing, and then it's over. Then I slip the jacket, drop the jacket, and to reduce handler conflict, I have a big giant protection tug. I offer that to the dog because a live tug is better than a dead jacket. So he grabs the tug, lets go of the jacket. I put the jacket back on. As soon as he sees that, with the toy, and he comes back at me. So I don't want to fight a dog over a dead jacket. I don't want to torture him until he gives it up and chooses me when I never give him a bite. Like no trainers ever give the dog naked bites. So like why should the dog care more about you naked than something he gets to bite all the time and have fun with? Makes no sense to me.
And earlier you mentioned the analogy of a wrestling match.
Mm-hmm. In the muzzle.
And even without a muzzle, do we make that like when we're training a sport dog, using that as an example, do we in a sense make the dog believe that it is almost like a wrestling match? We're not actually fighting a dog. This is just a game and we're playing with the dog. And the reason why I bring that up is because something that I think a lot of trainers struggle with, whether they're sport or they're just playing with their own dog, is teaching a really effective out, where even if they feel like they're still in the fight, that they'll release because that's how we're playing the game. Is there a process that you do that's different for teaching the out with a civil dog as opposed to a sport dog? Because I've heard that term, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but the blue fog or something like that, where all the police officers swarm in. If the dog took down the suspect, they don't want the dog to release and bite one of the police officers. I don't know if the training is different or how you interpret it when you're working with a dog, depending on the goals.
Okay, so again, with a rolling on the ground and wrestling with a dog while you're in a suit, most of the videos I see, the guys aren't really fighting the dog. They're making an Instagram reel so that they look good. Look what I can do with a dog on my bicep, right? But then not really paying attention to what the dog is doing to foster an aggressive response. The dog can be biting the suit and going, "I love this, man. Oh, you're rolling. I'm still in heaven, right? Because I'm biting the suit." Everything has to be done with a purpose. Everything has to be done with a goal. And if you don't have the goal to create sort of that state of being pissed off, rolling around on the ground doesn't automatically piss the dog off, right? So not an out. So in sport, of course, you have to have an out. But with a lot of dogs, um, the level of drive is obviously never quite where it is for real world stuff, because to get the intensity to a height where the dog will bite somebody without clothes on is way higher than biting a sleeve or biting a bite suit, right? In French ring, Mondia ring that you did, most of the dogs out for a toy.
Yeah.
Right? They struggle a lot more with alto pied guard than they do with alto pied, right? With the recall, the whistle, right? So when they get to come away to another toy, they have a much easier time than when they're supposed to out
Out and guard.
stay close to the decoy, because temptation is too great. So that's a much harder training process. But these dogs all work in prey. I worked with a guy in Norway, had a really nice police dog, had a couple of street bites, nice dog. But on the street, he never outed him. He just took him off. And he said he had a really good out, blah, blah, blah. I said, show me the out. So I was working him. So I worked him real light, and he did the out. I said, that looks great, and I'll send him again. And then I pissed him off, and then he could shove his toy up his butt. Because he was never going to come out. It was a good dog. He didn't want to come out of the fight for that. So the way I teach the out for police dogs, military, and stuff like that is a multi-step approach. Number one, what does the dog do after he lets go? Right? And most of the time, the dog ends up within a foot of the decoy after he lets go, right? So for me, it's important that the dog knows what to do when he's a foot away from the decoy. And most police dogs can't bring a dog to within a foot of a decoy and lay him down and the dog not bite. So that has to be taught first. Drive containment, capping, who, by the way, that's a term that I came up with. I heard it around, but I'm the first guy that put it in writing and explained what it's supposed to be. So,
and how would you explain it quickly?
It's to be the ability to internally contain drive and intensity without losing any of it when you're asked to do obedience. Like if a dog can contain, capping in prey is basically what every predator does when he's stalking an animal, right? There's no natural example for capping defense or capping aggression because there isn't. But if you spend enough time teaching capping in prey, eventually the dog learns that containment is a route to success. And then he will try, if you just block him from having success by breaking through, he will hopefully try other behaviors. And if he tries a behavior that brought him lots of success in prey, he's probably going to go into the lock stare. And, and it's like some people say the dog has to have obedience before he can cap. No, he has to have capping before he can do obedience without having to give up drive. That's what capping really is, right? It's a way to keep it all in, but have it at the ready. But there's a lot of dogs that say, now the dog is capped and the dog looks like Stevie Wonder because he doesn't know where to look, because if he looks at temptation, he breaks through again, right? So if the dog can't stare at what actually activates his drive and stay contained, it's not capping.
And what people would often call impulse control. And if they do call it that, are they missing some of the details that would be defined in capping?
Well, the thing is, impulse control is a big pet word.
Yeah.
Because it sounds really cool. And some people use it in sport as well, but anybody that uses that word doesn't even try to teach capping. They just basically, I want you to not do that. I don't care how you do it. And if that means the dog reduces himself so much that he just doesn't want it anymore, that's a form of impulse control too. Right? So There's no real definition for it. Like for me, the other thing that's lacking in capping is that the dog is assessed when he comes out of that state. So when I send a dog on a guy 10 meters away, he comes with pretty good whack, full grip, everything's good, right? Then I tell the dog to down and cap within a foot of the guy, and the bite is half. There's no reason for the bite to be half. He should still drive in with as much energy as he can muster out of that down, right? But why is the grip chewy? Or a lot of times you see too, the dog doesn't bite right where he's looking. He goes the long way around because he wants to get away from the handler first and then bite, because he's in conflict. He's not really totally kept. So that to me is a hugely important thing, that it's assessed how well the dog bites after you ask him to cap, right? And capping is one of the things that basically can only be taught through shaping. The dog has to discover it. There's nothing we can do to make him cap. It's and nobody teaches the lion how to freeze in the tall grass when the antelopes are restless. It's self-taught, trial and error, right? Because if the lion pounces too early, they cannot catch up with an antelope. They have to be close enough that 3 or 4 leaps make it happen. So they just don't get success. So it's negative punishment, if you want to use the terminology in the learning phase. That's another pet.
What would be an actual, do you have an example of a dog that you went through this process with, that you can kind of break down what you did with that dog in order to get those results that you wanted?
Yeah. So like capping alone, or we're still talking about the out?
The capping, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, you got me interested in that.
There's an article on the out on the same website. You can read it, Fundamentals of Aggression Control. But all the steps are there, so you can read that. Capping is, do you hunt?
No.
Okay.
I have, but I don't actively hunt.
Okay. So there's a weird thing that, like, people always want to do prey drive by running very erratic and all that kind of stuff, which is typically not how it starts, right? Like the wolf, the fox, whatever, will chase after an animal once it breaks and tries to flee. But they all try to get as close as they can, except the wolves in the Arctic that just run everything down. Like all the open space, prairie, tundra type of wolves, they just exhaust the prey animal until they can't walk anymore. So, but all the other thing where they chase quickly. So if you're sitting in the woods waiting for deer, and the deer smells you, or the deer hears a branch cracking or something like that, they freeze. That's the first thing they do. Then they snort, and then they start walking like their legs are hydraulic. It's really, really slow, and they put one foot in front of the other and one foot. Their body is totally tense the whole time, and all of a sudden they get too nervous, and then they just explode into full sprint, right? And a lot of times that hydraulic robotic movement in the prey animal happens when they feel a predator close, right? And at that point, the predator tries even harder to contain and not be discovered. So that almost activates cap or triggers capping in the predator if you do it right. And that's where the decoy has to be a master. Right. So I can usually, I start this with all the dogs, and I can usually get pretty much to where my toes are touching their toes, frontally in a bite suit before I make a trigger move. And it's the way I move and the way I get them to pay attention to little movements so that they just stay super focused and they do what predators naturally do, right? I start this a lot of times before we reach aggression because I need them to have the idea of what capping is and that capping is ultimately successful before all the high stress and high intensity things come in that we have no natural example for it. So for me, when I bring in a new candidate for whatever, especially the team that I work, first we check that everything is kind of good to go. The dog bites good. The dog accepts the suit, because I've had dogs that came from Holland that had only bitten on the KMPV suit, and I threw a French ring suit on, and they bit it and they recoiled and looked at like, what is that? I don't even know what that is. Because they're not biting the human, they're biting the suit, and when the material didn't feel right, they didn't want to bite it, right? Because it wasn't prey to them until obviously a few days later when we did enough conditioning. So as soon as I know that the biting is what I want it to be, at that stage, capping starts. Those dogs will never get another bite for barking or straining or pulling or acting like a jackass, except when they do an inaccessible. That's it. So that all the bites happen from capping, because in the tactical world, that's what matters. The dogs have to be silent. You can't halo jump close to a target and then hump it in the dark. And they waited for 2 weeks until there was a moonless night or overcast so that nobody has the advantage of night vision except our guys. And then they're wandering up to the target house, and all of a sudden the dog was, we're here, right? And everybody inside is awake. That can't happen.
And so I would imagine, of course, you're also adjusting depending on the goals, right? If you're training a dog for, don't they do the out, bark, and hold in like IGP? And I think they do that in PSA as well. So then it's situational for the dog at that point when you want them to bark as opposed to when you don't want them to bark, if they're within biting range, as an example.
Well, barking is relatively easy to teach to the strong passive defensive dog, because he barks naturally even when there's a threat, as long as the person that creates the threat doesn't do anything to escalate. And the way I explain it is this: once you read the Winkler aggression model, you see all this. So when people talk about fighting drive, there is no such drive, right? There's no such drive, because drive has a definition and it doesn't meet the definition. So when a dog bites purely in prey, all he has to do is express prey in his bark, right? Because he's basically still in drive and he's able to express it. If the dog has a slight defensive side to him because maybe he lacked intensity in the grip or his bark was too peepsy or whatever, maybe the trainer put a little bit of defense on him. Well, now he also has to be able to express defense in the bark, not just prey. If he gets dirty, it's not really dirty, but if the dog starts touching the helper or the sleeve, then there's something in him that he can't express only in the bark, and he bubbles over and tries to help himself to stuff. If the dog is in high frustration, what you see with a lot of Malinois, it intensifies everything. For us, I mean, for the work dogs, you can intensify most dogs to the point of reaching actual aggression where the dog will bite the crap out of people. That's the safest way to teach aggression anyway. But the dog may now have to express prey, a little bit of defense, and frustration, right? If they can't do that, they're not going to clean out, right? Because they're just trading what they're doing. And it's the same thing with the dogs, like the police dogs that have to be quiet. If the dog can't cap prey, defense, and frustration, maybe a little, more aggressive side, maybe pain aggression as well. Now the dog cannot be that close without expressing the part that he hasn't been able to cap yet, right? So I'm a very scientific trainer. I don't use the terms like a lot of people do. Like for me, once you put it, like, number one, dog training is not Skinner, right? Because we don't have a box. And your behavior affects the outcome as much as their behavior, which means it's not purely on the dog. That's something a lot of people don't understand. They want, wow, we change science and we do this and we do that. Well, just go and keep your hand in your food pouch and see how much eye contact the dog gives you, right? But if your hands are down by the side until you click, the dog looks you right in the eyes, click, then you reach in the thing. He makes it click. He makes it click. The clicker makes you reach in the pouch and give him food. It's the best way to explain it. But once you can put a command with it, operant condition is over anyways, as far as the terminology goes, right? Like there's reward, but reward is not the same as reinforcement. Reinforcement is to strengthen the behavior in the teaching phase. Once it's been taught, it's something different. Like for me, like I'm not a fan of negative reinforcement at all. To me, it's the only quadrant I don't use at all. I just think it's pointless. It works. I know it works. I grew up training dogs in the 70s. I know it works. I've seen it, right? The dogs don't look very good doing it, but they do it. But there's nothing, I believe, that you cannot teach a dog motivationally that you need to use negative reinforcement for. I just don't think that. To me, for sport, for any kind of performance work, if a dog doesn't want to retrieve through some kind of motivation, maybe he shouldn't do sport with him. You know what I mean? Get another dog. You don't have to torture the one you have just because you want to earn a title. That's not cool for me. But my point is, once the reinforcement phase is over and the dog can reproduce the behavior on command, it's no longer reinforcement. You don't have to sort of strengthen it. You have to reward it. You have to pay it. So you can use other words, but people keep still using negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement, and so on. To me, it's not that. Because when learning is over, because all the terms, Skinner didn't call it operant conditioning. He called it learning psychology. It's limited to learning. Once learning is over, then call it reward. What's wrong with saying reward? Well, because it doesn't sound very scientific.
Well, I find that very interesting. There's something that I teach my students. I call it the 3 key events to dog training. And so I use the term reward event, reinforcement event, and then correction event or punishment event.
But it's not punishment anymore. It's not punishment anymore.
Well, I use it as I typically call it a correction event. And I think it's important to define what we mean by it. So when I say correction event, I do usually mean the use of positive punishment, but I have a system in the way that I like to approach certain things. And I found it interesting that you said you don't use negative reinforcement, because I'm curious as to how you would do certain things that I do when I use negative reinforcement as a replacement. And so I'll give you an example. And I picked up the term reward event from Michael Ellis. I heard him say it at one of his seminars. And I really like that he used that, because something I noticed when I would train new trainers is they would have a hard time understanding, once the dog was classically conditioned to a marker, if they're using a yes or a clicker, that they had a significant amount of time to be able to deliver the reward. It wasn't like we click, we mark the behavior, and now we have an additional 1 second to get the reward to the dog. And that was this misinterpretation I was noticing from a lot of people, because I would say, let's assume the dog is classically conditioned to the marker and you mark a behavior. How long do you have to deliver the primary reinforcer?
Time out. A marker is two things, right? It's identifying a behavior, which you don't have to necessarily do if you're close enough with the reward, the payment, the reinforcement.
Right, exactly right, yeah.
Right? Like, to me, I see people that are luring, that have the food right here, and then they open their fingers, give the dog the food, and then they still click. Why are you clicking?
Yeah. Well,
it makes no sense.
To add to that, I've told new trainers that, like, you don't, if you're using a lure, you can get the reward to the dog the moment they do the behavior.
Correct.
But I have also told new trainers, if you want to practice the marker, even though you don't need it in that moment, you're practicing your timing, marking the moment the dog's butt hits the ground.
Correct.
For an example, that's okay, because you're working on your skill. But no, you don't necessarily need it in that moment.
Yeah, correct, because it's perfectly well marked if they get the treat.
Right.
And then the second thing that it is, and this is why, like, you use the word marker for both. And the marker to me is just to identify a behavior, and that's it, right? It's a time purchase. When you use it as an identifier, it's a time purchase. So you identify it, and then you have a little bit of time before you give the dog the treat or the ball, whatever, right? So it buys you time. So that's the important part too. The classical conditioning part should be termed reward replacement, because that's what it is. Otherwise, it's not classical conditioning, right? And people need to understand that when they're clicking or when they're saying yes, which I'm not as big a fan of as a clicker, if they're saying yes, if they're clicking, the dog gets a very, very similar reward as from the actual treat, right? Because the dog, in Pavlov's experience, didn't drool when he heard the bell because he was expecting food. His brain reacted as if food was there. His brain says, I got food, right? So whenever you do click and treat, the dog gets basically two treats in his brain. Remember PTSD? It's an unrelated sound or smell or look that basically makes you feel like you're in that traumatic event again. It's subconscious, it's involuntary, it just happens. And the food thing with Pavlov and classical conditioning is basically the very same thing. If you click, the dog goes, food, and wow, and all that, all immediately. It isn't just because you identify. And for me, I like to use the clicker for certain things because I believe that we can convince the dog that he creates the click. I don't believe that we can ever do that as efficiently or as effectively with our voice, because we talk all the time, right? So
that's why we try to make it distinct, right? You try to make it sound different than your normal conversation. But I always tell people, like, what makes clickers so valuable is that they're very consistent. They always sound the same. And typically it's easier for people to separate two physicals, click and reward, as opposed to a verbal and a physical. Yes and reward is harder because they do what I just did there. They overshadow or they pair. Now, I'm curious to see what your opinion is on how I define markers. I always try to make things as easy as possible for somebody new into dog training, pet, or they want to be a professional trainer. I define a marker as a word or sound that predicts any one of the four quadrants of operant conditioning, because that helps us, in a sense, change a dog's behavior through effective timing. So if I have a marker that predicts punishment, or sound rather that predicts punishment, marker. And I even use a marker that predicts negative reinforcement, which is why I wanted to tell you how I use negative reinforcement to see what you would use as an alternative, because I use it very specifically for what I call teachable moments. Now, I used to use the word wrong, but then people started using the word wrong incorrectly, meaning they would tell their dog down, let's say, for an example, and the dog wouldn't go into the down, and they would say wrong and make the dog down. And then I'm like, hold up. What you're doing is you're technically teaching the dog down wrong, because that's the pattern you're showing the dog. You're saying down, then wrong, and then you're signaling the behavior. So I would only use it when I'm being reactive.
Or you're making it a marker, or you're making it a marker for negative reinforcement.
Or maybe negative punishment. You're not getting the reward.
That's
perhaps.
what it should be. That's what wrong should be.
Mm-hmm. Well, depending on how you condition the word, right?
Yeah,
Wouldn't that be typically referred to as a non-reinforcement marker? And I might use those, but I typically don't. And the only time I would use that is if the dog gives me the wrong answer. You know, I say down and the dog sits.
But isn't a negative reinforcement, isn't the non-reinforcement marker negative punishment?
Negative punishment, yes, correct.
So it's the same thing, right? It's look, when you get to the point of command responsive stuff and it's just not reliable enough, you can either use negative punishment, which basically always works, right? Because it's a withholding is a concept that lasts all the time, or you can use a correction. It's no longer positive punishment. Positive punishment is just making a dog stop something.
Right, we're adding something unpleasant to prevent the repeat of the behavior.
Correct. But when the dog knows what to do, then it becomes a correction. Because if the dog knows what the correct thing to do is, he can default to that. Mm-hmm. Where in the learning psychology experiments, there was no default behavior. It was just don't do that. They didn't know what to do, right? It was just don't do that. And like my positive punishment marker basically is pfui. And like, I don't care whether they ever want to do that again. Like if they get close to a snake or whatever, or if they chase a deer, I don't need my dogs to chase deer. So it's basically pfui and or immediately the punisher itself. But it's not a correction at that point. It's a punishing. It's punishing the behavior. It's not, they don't have to come back. They don't have to down. They don't have to do something else. If like with deer, I can usually stop the dogs with a down because they cap fairly well, right? But if I don't know what it is, or I think it's a snake, it's automatically pfui and e-collar stim if they don't immediately respond to the pfui.
So kind of like an incompatible behavior, right? Like you can't chase the deer if you go into a down.
Yeah, but the thing is, he has to contain his drive, get a clear head, and then listen to me again. That's more capping. But if I think it's a snake, right? I'm not gonna. I would still go to the pfui with a deer if the dog doesn't go into the down. But if it's a snake or something like that, especially a poisonous snake, I'm just not going to take the chance. So it's immediately don't do that. End it. Crush it.
I do want to ask your opinion on, again, what I call teachable moments. So I teach my students, this is anytime we're reacting to a dog if they're violating a boundary or breaking a stay. It's the first step that I do before I would punish the dog. And so, like, let's say, and when I say punishment, I'm talking positive punishment, not negative punishment. So let's say I'm working a stay, and this would be the same way that I would work a boundary, not jumping on the sofa if I was to teach a dog that, if that was something I wanted. So the moment the dog steps off of the stay, let's say I'm teaching a play stay, the moment the dog steps off, I would use my marker for negative reinforcement. Typically with my dogs, I use the word wrong. So the dog steps off, I would say wrong. I calmly walk to the dog. I either use spatial pressure to get the dog back on the platform, or I'll grab the leash and I'll guide the dog back on the platform. Once they're on the platform, I say, good dog, but I don't give them a reward because I don't want to create that reinforcement loop. And the reason why I use negative reinforcement to get them to do the behavior instead of like a food lure or something like that, because I don't want to, A, damage the food lure by not rewarding them, or B, rewarding them and creating that reinforcement loop. And I continue this until the dog steps off. I say wrong and they go back on their own. Once I see that, I go, okay, you've had enough opportunities to learn the rules. Next time you step off, it's not going to be a wrong, it's going to be a no. And I might use a leash pop or something like that. And then that's how I start getting the reliability. What would you do replacing the negative reinforcement stage that I'm using there?
I would just spend more time doing it. like a long stay. You're talking about a long stay, right?
Or yeah, you know, any stay. I mean, if we're doing it in the beginning, we're not going to be doing it for that long, right? The
Yeah,
three
yeah, but
Ds,
that's the
duration,
goal.
distance.
That's the goal,
Correct. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So like in IGP, you have to do a
10-minute downstay.
correct. Um, but if you're doing the down with recall or stand with recall, if you compulse your dog into the staying, right? He
Mm,
gives up determination, he gives up drive, and everything's lowered. So
yeah.
unless the dog has a really, really good recovery, he's never going to recall as fast as he would if he was still highly motivated,
Mhm.
right? So you can usually correct a dog for the down in motion. The sit in motion is really hard to correct because a lot of times the dogs overcorrect and go into a down. Right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Same thing
yeah.
goes with the stand. If you try to correct a dog on a stand, um, they do a sit or a down, or they do some other default behavior in their mind that isn't the right one. And I don't think that you can correct a dog out of that incorrect down into a sit or a stand. It's just too ambiguous for a dog. So I'd rather help them
Mhm.
out. I use a lot of like I do like a reward behind the dog when I do a stand stay, because if they see that there's a reward there, they heal with me, but part of their brain is on the what's behind them, so they have a much easier time freezing and giving up forward progress, right?
Right.
And
Reward placement, right?
yeah, reward placement. So you can kind of help them with that because it's a performance event, right? If you just want
Right.
a dog to stay and I tell you when to get up, and if they get up like, oh my God, I hope nothing else happens, that's that's okay for pets, but
And ideally, we don't even want that for pets either. I mean, I try to, the way that I like to train is I try to teach everything with positive reinforcement, even when I teach leash pressure.
mhm,
And we'll say, I mean, I define that as negative reinforcement initially in the beginning because I apply
yep,
pressure, they comply, I turn
mhm,
it off, but eventually it does become a signal like, hey, follow this and cool things are going to
yep,
happen. Even when I teach negative reinforcement, I use positive reinforcement to teach it.
mhm,
So like I'll apply pressure, dog resists a little bit. I've already taught the dog a food lure. I bring the food out, the dog walks forward, I turn off the pressure, yay. So then it becomes a signal for something good, and it's not seen as like, oh, you're preventing me from doing something that I want. This
mhm,
sucks. And it's one of the reasons why I kind of have an issue when people use the word aversive as a way to describe a tool, because based on the definition, aversive means a strong dislike. So a tool
yeah,
is only aversive to the dog if the dog perceives it as a strong dislike. But if we train it in a way where it becomes a signal for something awesome, then the dog doesn't perceive it that way.
yeah. But then you don't have it if you talk about e-collar or something like that.
And any kind of tool. You know, I often hear people say, like, oh, this tool's an aversive. And that's technically not the correct use of the word because of what it means. It's only aversive in the perception of the dog. If I take a shock collar and I start constantly shocking the dog, or a
Mhm,
remote training collar, some
yeah.
people prefer to recall, then yeah, the dog might see it as something they strongly dislike. But that's based on the application of the tool, not the tool itself.
Yeah, that I mean, it's also situational. Like I
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a lot of dogs that stimulate from the e-collar in bite work.
Mhm.
They don't take it as an aversive or as a negative at all. They
Right.
just
Right.
feed off of it. Um, they did the only people that are allowed to use e-collars in Norway are sheep herders. They're not dog trainers. They don't care. But they're the ones that are allowed to have it. You do aversion training to sheep for dogs, but there's a lot of dogs. If the dog comes too close to the sheep and they stim it, and the dog doesn't know what the stim is because they certainly don't spend any time conditioning it, right? They're standing within a couple of feet of the sheep and suddenly it hurts. Guess what some dogs do? Attack the sheep
Attack the sheep.
because
Yeah.
the sheep just bit me. So it's all contextual and situational and
Mm.
individual dog specific. Like some dogs, I would never use E until they really understand what it is, because they're just going to go out at hurt and they're going to whack anybody. Like, look,
Mhm.
negative reinforcement. What would have happened with Skinner? You know the experiment Skinner did with the rat, right? But basically, it was just it's a box. It's a closed box. The floor is made of wire mesh, and then they turned on electricity, and they had sort of a predetermined idea in their head what they wanted the rat to do and what was incorrect and what was correct. So if the rat took, just arbitrarily, the rat took a step to the left, the juice turned off. The rat took a step to the right, the juice stayed on. Eventually, the rat stepped left and it turned off again. If the rat just froze because it didn't know what to do, when the juice stayed on too long, they just stopped and did another break and then another experiment, right? But my thing has always been put 2 rats in the thing and turn the floor electric. Rats,
they might go at each other.
That's right. And the rats are nasty, and they're going to go and blame the other for it, and they're going to fight. That's what I was talking about earlier. Like, dog training isn't pure operant conditioning, because there's another individual there all the time. Like when you do the pressure with a slip lead, well, you're not just doing pressure. Like, you're not just hanging the dog, you're guiding the dog as well. So it's already not operant. It's already not proper negative reinforcement. It's compulsion. It all falls into instrumental conditioning, right? Guidance and assistance, and with, sometimes dogs need more pressure when they're being guided, but they're being guided to the correct behavior anyway. They're not having to figure it out on their own. The whole thing with operant conditioning is it's randomly occurring behaviors that create the outcome. There's no particular thing that's right or wrong when it starts, right? Like the animals, there was no dogs in Skinner's thing anyways, but the animals were just sort of out of boredom making movements. And he unfortunately used the term behavior all the time when they were really just simple actions with no real purpose behind any of it. And then, of course, if it was reinforced, they kept doing it. If it was punished, they stopped doing it. And, when they came out, like, punishment doesn't work or is not as effective as positive reinforcement, or actually either reinforcement. And people use that line, and you've seen that line probably used before, that some of the scientists, even Skinner himself, said that reinforcement was more effective than punishment, right?
But it would depend, of course, on the context.
So no, it's 100% true.
Or you mean, so if there's not something else involved, right? And that's kind of why at least I define operant conditioning for dog training is it's a dog's recognition of a pattern within their control that's relevant to them, right? So in a sense where you're saying when there's someone else involved, so like if I'm luring a dog into a position and the dog sits and I give him a piece of food, I want the dog to believe that sitting is what got them the food, but I'm also kind of in control of it in a sense.
Operant conditioning is behavior or training dogs by the result or outcome and consequence of the actions. That's it, right?
Yes.
And again, most of what Skinner worked with was actions. There was no behaviors, right?
You push the lever, you get a treat.
But the thing is, before the animal got to the lever, there was 20 repetitions of reinforcement to even get to where the lever was, right? And that's called chaining. And people throw the word chaining around all the time. It's like, for me, if I use a drive and I know the behavior that I want is automatically occurring in its full sequence in a certain drive, then I just do that. Because it's way, way, way faster than chaining. But you don't have to chain something that's already naturally a chain. Like retrieving. Retrieving is a chain in prey drive, right? The animal makes prey, picks it up, and carries it to a different point. That's retrieving. I just have to teach them that I'm the different point. That's the only difficulty when I do it that way. But I can also start with the dowel in my hand, and the dog touches it, click and treat. And then the next time he has to touch it longer, then I click and treat, and eventually he has to mouth it a little bit, click and treat. And you do thousands of reps of that shit, and then you put it on the floor, and then when the dog touches it again, and you wait till he finally kind of grabs it, and I'm going, oh my God. Like,
so kind of like back chaining and free shaping almost combined.
Well, it is shaping, but what are you shaping? You're not shaping a retrieve. You're shaping little itty bitty pieces, little itty bitty actions that you chain together to look like a retrieve. Right? That's how negative, that's how force retrieve works. I
Which
don't.
I think a lot of people like to do that for sport work because they're trying to prevent like chewing and things like that. If the dog naturally does that, which we were talking about at the beginning, sometimes people will do things just to get that one extra point. And are they doing it for themselves or are they doing it for the dog?
Yeah. Well, and again, you don't have to do it that way. You can teach it motivationally in drive, preferably, because it goes very quickly. And then you just have to take away the conflict of the hold and sit. And it's not that hard. You can use a little bit of pressure sometimes, right? Which is a more insistence than force. But like the newest thing is this unforced forced retrieve. What the hell is that? It's either
Yeah, I've heard that
unforced.
before.
It's just because they want to take the negative connotations from all that stuff away. I talked to, you know who Pat Nolan is?
Yes.
Yeah, but like we were sitting at a dinner, I think it was at the ATK9 conference, and we were talking. It was this couple from France, and they kept talking about this and talking about that, and then the negative reinforcement comes up and says like, you don't need to do that, and it's not nice, right? And then after we were going back and forth, and after a while, Pat goes, I use negative reinforcement when I do the retrieves. I said, really? The first time your dog puts his mouth on a duck, you turned on the screws, and the grabbing the duck turned it off. Oh, no, 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 no. They've been retrieving since they were puppies, but it wasn't formal. Okay. So what did you do? You used a little pressure to make them not chew. You used a little pressure to hold it longer, to be willing to go into the side position, which you need for field trials and stuff like that. That's not negative. That's not negative reinforcement, and that's not a forced retrieve, right? What drives me crazy is that people throw these scientific words around and they don't know it. None of them have read Pavlov. None of them have read Skinner. Have you ever read the book On Aggression?
No, but I've heard about it. I
So
should add it to my reading list.
yeah, it's a cool book. It's not doesn't have a lot of info about dogs in it because like that's why a lot of people don't read it. But it's a very cool book for me. What I like the most about it is the German title for the book, right? Which is Das sogenannte Böse, which basically is the so-called evil or the so-called bad, right? Because we call aggression something bad, and especially in the pet industry, everybody wants to do away with aggression. Real aggression you cannot get rid of. You can only control it. You can keep it under control. That's it. The defensive responses that most of the dogs exhibit, you can typically address with threshold changes, distance changes, and developing a whole lot of trust in the handler. That's it. Like if my dog feels threatened by strangers and he wants to bite them, and maybe with a little bit more oomph than other dogs, but then I need to make sure that he doesn't feel that way 50 yards away. Right? I go as close as I see the reaction, and I take a few steps back. I wait until he says, okay, I thought something bad was going to happen if I didn't bite him. I guess I was wrong. Then we can make the distance shorter until we're within arm's length of each other. And then I just need to also teach him that when I say be nice, for whatever, like I use the German phrase, which is be nice, brav sei, right? But when I say brav sei, somebody in proximity enough to touch my dog can never touch my dog. I need to be willing to yell at that person or backhand him to prevent him from touching my dog. Because if I promise that nothing you anticipated or were worried about will happen to you, it will not happen. Period. And if you stick with that, it's manageable. I could always sit on a park bench with my dog next to people, even though he wanted to light them up. But if I went to, like, I rode the subway with him sometimes, the socially aggressive one I'm talking about, I would muzzle him. And I would not tell him, be nice, because I knew people would touch him and there wasn't enough time for me to protect him. So I just had a muzzle on him. So,
and the moment you put a muzzle on, people leave them alone.
Well, when a 90-plus pound schnauzer with a wire basket muzzle on, people still touched him. Most
Really?
people
I've
didn't, but dumbasses would, and then they got a gut punch with the muzzle, and then that was it.
Yeah,
And
from my experience, anytime I've had a muzzle on a dog, it's like now the person is actually safer,
yeah,
and that's when they don't touch them. But
yeah.
you could put "Do not pet" in big, bold yellow font all over the dog's vest and collar, and they'll still pet them.
I'm a very off-putting person, so most people don't really want to, like in public. Subway is very compressed, but in public,
Mhm.
nobody wants to touch my dog. It's maybe 1 in 100, and then I usually tell them no. I don't let anybody
Mhm.
touch my dogs except for family. It's not necessary. There's no need. Like I socialize them up to a certain age, and then that stops, because they
Yeah.
do. They people will always do stupid stuff, and
Mhm.
and I,
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
I'm just not taking a chance. Like all my dogs are potentially bite dogs. I have some that are not as good as others, but they all have the potential, and I'm just not going to take the chance. Right? I don't go in public very much, anyways, because I'm kind of antisocial. But that's kind of the thing. I think there's a lot of people that learn sort of the um, cliff note version of what all these concepts are. Nobody really spends any time, and they don't have had enough time under their belt to really get the real life examples to understand it properly. Like if the learning psychology is kind of harmless, that people use it wrong. It doesn't do so much harm. But when people talk about aggression and things like that, it's just, or dominance. Like I saw this video, it's going around on Facebook right now, and the guy was making a pretty good point about not letting dogs and kids unsupervised, and don't do this and don't do that. And then he says the dog is clearly dominant and predatory, and I'm going like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's like, what was predatory about? And then an adult comes out. It was two little kids, one girl that was maybe 6, 7, and the little boy that was maybe 4, 5 or something, like visibly smaller than the girl. And the dog kind of goes up to the girl. It looked like she had something in her hand at first, or maybe it was food, or maybe there was food smell in her hands. I don't know. But he got up to her hand, and then she leaned over, and sure enough, he bites and grabbed a hold of her enough to thrash her around and took her to the ground and all that. But then an adult stepped through the door and just yelled, and the dog just immediately backed off. So it's not such a highly aggressive dog. It was just a weird situation that sort of blew up. Um, and
Yeah.
I agree with all that management stuff. It just needs to be like labeling a dog predatory. It's just wrong. So
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying too, and it's one of the things where when I teach online, I always try really hard. Of course, I'm not gonna do it every time, but I do try to make it clear that these are things that I do. So when I'm trying to break something down, it's like, this is what I do. Someone who I study when it comes to business is Alex Hermosi. And I saw an interview that he was doing. If you don't know who he is, he has a massive following for business, and he has like a multi-million dollar company where he buys other companies. But he was saying, if I go online and I tell people this morning I ate a burrito, he goes, that's a fact. I ate a burrito this morning. But if I go online and I tell people, hey, you need to eat a burrito, then suddenly people become defensive. And so it's one of the reasons, even when I'm talking to other trainers, I'm like, don't try to tell people this is what they should do. Just tell them this is what you're doing.
mm,
Right. And it's another reason why, even in the beginning, where I said I don't consider myself an expert on aggression, because I haven't worked with that many dogs, maybe about like I said, maybe a dozen, maybe a couple dozen. I don't even really know, because it hasn't been that many. So I don't want to sit here and say this is the way it is, because if I say something wrong, I don't want it to come back at me. I want it to be clear, like, this is where I'm currently at.
yeah.
This is the experience that I have. And I also think that when we are using certain terminology or we're using certain words, the main goal is to transfer what's going on in our mind to the other person's mind. Right. So if I say I'm using a leash to do a behavior, I want the person to understand how I'm doing it in a way that if they wanted to replicate it,
Mm-hmm.
they would be able to do so. But I know what you mean too, where someone says something and they're factually incorrect, especially when they're in a position of authority.
Yeah. And, you know, do you feel that most people you work with care about what something is called?
I well, maybe the dog trainers that I work
Yeah,
with,
that's
but
different. But
you're
normal,
right,
the
right.
handlers or owners?
I try to use a lot of I try to use terminology. I don't let me rephrase that. When I first got into dog training, the person I was learning from called a marker a special noise. And maybe they thought that was easier for the person to understand, but I like to repeat terms over and over and explain what I mean when I'm saying it to somebody. So if
Mhm.
they do look it up, they look up, oh, I remember, he says here condition reinforcer. What is that? And they look it up. Or if I tell them you're creating a reinforcement loop, they can look that up and see the science behind it. Or if I say you're overshadowing and I explain what that is, they can look it up. So it's really a goal of mine to get them to understand what I'm talking about and to be able to apply it, but then to also trust that I'm not just trying to make things up on the spot. And I want
Mhm.
them to understand why I do things that I do. I always try to give the person the why behind why I do things, of course, as I do them, so they are more motivated to do it if they want to follow the type of training system that I use.
If they're willing to educate themselves. So
Exactly right.
a
Yeah.
lot of people aren't. They're just like most people that come to a trainer didn't spend a lot of time trying to educate themselves on how to have a dog. Because
Mhm.
most of the dogs, you probably have the same experience. Like most of the dogs that come to you, they're not a problem. They're
Right.
not.
Yeah.
They're just not. They need to not pull on the leash. They don't have to learn heeling.
Mhm.
They can learn a wait so they can sit or stand or do whatever as long as they stop moving. So I can open a door with my keys and whatnot. It's very, very simple. And for you to not be able to get that is like those people just figure the dog figures everything out by osmosis, and they don't. And some
Mhm.
people are just horrible communicators with dogs. They just are. Like I try to not take the leash from handlers very often. My wife says you shouldn't because it's unfair because you can talk to them and they can't. The dogs, right? Because
Mhm.
I can get dogs to I get dogs sometimes that don't have any idea what I'm saying because I just start babbling in Bavarian or whatever, and the dogs do what I want. It's not like it's a trained command. It's just between body language and the fact that the dogs actually pay attention to me. I don't know why it happens, but it happens. But it's an advantage for sure, right? Which sometimes when I do take the leash would be when a handler really struggles helping his dog capping, keeping his shit together because I don't
Mhm.
really have to do anything. I just teach the dog that holding it in is successful, right? I don't really have to do much more than that. And whether the handler can ever really duplicate that doesn't really matter because at the end of the day the dog just needs to do it. And if I'm the one that was did the first half of what the dog needed to learn, then by that time the handler sort of takes the line again, it's all done. It's I think people need to understand my aspect when it comes to all that is I approach everything from the dog's perspective. I try to just explain the dog's doing this because of like what are the instincts and what are the drives that actually make dogs do things, right? And I think if people understand their dog a little bit better, some of the training becomes much easier for them, I think. And I know all the terminology. Like I have a bachelor in science in applied animal behavior, and is that relevant? It is and it isn't. That I got it as an equivalency because it needed it for my immigration. Be, I started to I wanted to be a vet, right? So I started vet school, or I started the pre-veterinary stuff that you had to have to apply to vet school. And so I have a certain amount of schooling. And then I was training dogs. Then I started writing articles and giving lectures and all that kind of stuff. So to get you know what an H-1B visa is?
No.
No, it's the only dual intent visa. So it's not just a work permit. It allows you to also apply for immigration at the same time.
Okay.
So when we needed that so that I could stay here and work while the green card was being processed, I needed that H-1B. And the H-1B, I wish they had it for other crafts as well, but they only have it for educated people, university educated people. So the job that you're applying for has to have a bachelor's degree as a requirement, right? So you only bachelor's degree holders need apply kind of thing. And then the applicant has to have a bachelor's degree in that discipline. So of course I didn't have that because I stopped after the pre-veterinary stuff. So we sent all my articles and all my PowerPoints and all that stuff and reference letters and all that kind of stuff to a think tank, and they sent it to, I don't know, 6 different universities or something like that. And they basically wrote me letters that what we're seeing here is somebody who operates on at least a bachelor's of science in behavioral science. And most of it was because of the way I talk about dogs and describe dogs and the way I write about training, because it's all very much from the way the dog is seeing all this. Like outing, we brought up defense and outing to wrap it all up because we're coming full circle again. The first thing that we need to understand is this: a police dog, not a Schutzhund dog, a police dog, military dog, special ops dog. We need the dog. We teach the dog that he can keep himself safe by biting, right? If a guy tries to scare you more, bite him harder. If a guy tries to control you, muscle you around, throw you off a balcony, bite him harder. You can establish control by biting. Then one day we get the grandiose idea to say, give up your safety and all control. That's what it is. It isn't letting go of something. It's stopping the fight, stopping to fend for your own safety and welfare and all that kind of stuff. People don't understand that.
So it's conflicting.
Yeah, the dog was taught when it gets scarier, bite harder. And now you're saying, and if the decoy, the role player does his job right, the dog thinks this is real, right? So he has real emotions and everything is real for the dog. And then you say, let him go. Mm-hmm. And I tell the police officer all the time, as I said, you catch a guy on foot, get in a fight. The guy is fighting you pretty good. You got a bloody nose and a bruised lip, and you don't have cuffs on him. You try to get him on the ground, and you're fighting. You finally got him to the point where you can put the first cuff on or whatnot. And your supervisor drives by and rolls down his window and goes, hey, let him go. There's not a cop in the world that's going to let that guy go, no matter what the consequences are. You know what I mean? Because he doesn't feel safe. He just doesn't. And neither does the dog. So the first thing we need to do is the capping stuff, of course. But when we make the dog let go, and we can use a pry stick, we can use an e-collar, you can use a choke chain. The E is the best because it doesn't physically move the dog, so everything seems under control, right? The first thing we need to do when the dog has let go, hopefully he has that close quarter cap, is that we let him linger there for a good long while. And there's a lot of dogs that after they let go and they try to hold it and they take a couple of shots like, won't you fucking move, right? And then they stop again. And all of a sudden, their worst fears didn't come true. They were safe because dad said it was safe. And then they start to not resist it so much. Because they don't resist it because they're dicks. They resist it because they don't feel safe if they let go. If we did our training rights, that the dog knows this is real. You must bite, you must fight, you must use power. Why would it suddenly let go? Oh, if he lets go of a ball, he should let go of a man. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. None. Right?
Two totally different scenarios.
Correct. So safety is not at all part of it. It's barely, and I think the prey drive is more intense and higher for a bite suit, even if you haven't gotten into aggression yet, than it is ever for a ball. So that's just my opinion. It's a real strange thing the way people approach things. The aggression piece. Make the dog aggressive. Make the dog so that he wants to hurt somebody. And then show them that people that don't have a bite suit on are also targets. And that's it. And I use classical conditioning with aggression as well. But that's a little bit weird, right? Because we know there must be a real stimulus to create a replacement stimulus, right? So how do we know when the dog is in aggression so we can create a replacement stimulus for the aggression? We don't. So as a decoy, I can sense it a little bit more than the handlers, but the handlers can't, right? So they need to repeat. We use a verbal marker for that. We need to repeat that marker frequently enough that hopefully you hit the target often enough so that the dog hears that word often enough when he is actually feeling like wrecking somebody, right? And it shouldn't be the bite command. It should be something else, because the bite command usually also means go. And when I put a dog at the front door of a building search, I want him pissed off. I give him that word, and hopefully he's already pissed off. And we always see it. The dogs lay there, they're intense. There's backup officers. They're excited from the ride over. They're already pretty cranked. And all of a sudden you say that word, and their nails dig into the ground, and their elbows tighten because they're starting to be spring-loaded, ready to go for action. So it adds whatever they normally feel when they're doing bite work. And I don't think that's used enough. You can use the police announcements or some of the things like show me your hands or whatever, but you can't yell show me your hands as well when the dog is not even near a guy yet. You know what I mean? You can, but you can't whisper it. And, the size of the bell didn't matter whether the dog drooled. Whatever bell you used created it. So you don't have to say the word very loud or very hard or very harsh. So I create the aggression emotionally. Most of the time the dogs muzzle fight by the time, we try it out, but we try it out for different things. We need obviously the dog to focus on civil people. The biggest challenge is always the control, keeping the dogs quiet. When you're throwing flashbangs and shooting targets and, explosive breaches and stuff like that, coming out of a helicopter on a rope and run into a structure, it spins them up pretty good. And then they still keep them quiet when we're getting ready to work.
And this has been an incredibly stimulating conversation. I could keep going for another few hours easily.
Yeah.
For those that want to follow your work and learn more from you, where can they find you?
They can find me on Facebook under Armin Winkler. They can find me online on a website called Rivanna with 2 N's, K9, letter K, number 9, services.com. And, I'm on Facebook. I have the Rivanna Canine Services page as well, so they can certainly find me there. I offer Zoom consultations for people that need to, sometimes police dogs don't bite and they want help, or, a dog can't learn to stand, or people have problems with tracking, or pets. I don't mind doing pets. I just don't have a lot of time to do that kind of stuff. So, but I've done a fair number of them, and like I said, I'm a behaviorist and a dog trainer. So.
And I'll make sure all the links are in the description of this video. And for everyone else, thank you for watching and being part of this journey. We'll see you in the next one.
I need to give a shout out to my friend Steve Houston, who hooked us up.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the beautiful things about this world, the networking. Yeah, it's very important.
I promised him I would say it, so I appreciate that he did it. So, all right, maybe we can do it again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.